Don't start that. There's a Senator. Don't get over that.
I used to know this name, but I know really.
Get your phone ready.
Mr. President, messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor.
I'm to advise that I've heard from Senators Maynard, Walcott, and Moore that they will be joining us a little later.
I'm going to say that.
I correct that. I'm told that Senator Moore is here. And as far as Senator Tate is concerned, she's out of the jurisdiction and will not be with us today.
Minutes.
Yes,
Minutes didn't confirm.
the minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday, the 22nd of January, Wednesday, the 5th of February, and Friday, 14th of February, and Friday, the 14th of February, are all ready to be confirmed.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the minutes of Wednesday, January 22nd, 2020, of Wednesday, February 5th, 2020, and Friday, February 14th, 2020, be taken as read and confirmed.
The question is that the minutes of the meeting of the Senate for the dates indicated, the 3 dates, be now taken as read and confirmed. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I am commanded to lay the following documents: the annual report of the Air Transport Licensing Authority for the period April 1, 2013 to March 31st, 2014. Secondly, the annual reports of the Air Transport Licensing Authority for the periods April 1st, 2014 to March 31st, 2015, and April 1st, 2015 to March 31st, 2016. Third, the audited financial statements of the Board of Management of Lester Vaughan School for the financial years ended March 31st, 2007 to March 31st, 2011. Four, the audited financial statements of the Board of Management of Christ Church Foundation School for for the financial years ended March 31st, 2006 to March 31st, 2010. Fifth, the Customs Amendment Regulations 2020. Sixth, the Immigration Amendment Forms and Fees Regulations 2020. Seven, the Public Service General Amendment Order 2020. Eight, the signed loan contract number 4920/0CBA Public Sector Modernization Program. 9, the signed loan contract number 4865/0CBA Sustainable Energy Investment Program 2. 10, the Transport Authority Fares and Tolls Regulations 2020. And 11, the Green Paper on the 2020 Water Protection and Land Use Zoning Policy.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate and moved by a minister.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this Honorable House suspend Standing Order 45-2 for the remainder of this sitting so that we may proceed with item 3 in all its stages.
The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the balance of today's sitting. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the following bills be read a first time. The Exchange Control Amendment Bill 2020 and the British American Insurance Company Barbados Limited Preservation of Investments Amendment Bill 2020.
The question is that the two bills indicated by the Leader of Government Business be now read a first time. All honorable member in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Public business. Order number 3, sir. In the name of the Honorable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the British American Insurance Company Barbados Limited Preservation of Investments Amendment Bill 2020.
Please proceed, Madam Leader.
Mr. President,
Ledger.
I seek permission from this Honorable House to introduce item 3, which was just read, and 4 as a cognate debate, as they both relate to the same matter.
Leave is sought for items 3 and 4 to be treated together as a cognate debate. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. You may so proceed.
Mr. President, the bill before this Honorable House proposes to amend the British American Insurance Company Barbados Limited Preservation of Investments Act 2016-5. As I introduce this bill, sir, which is called the British American Insurance Company Barbados Limited Preservation of Investments Amendment Bill 2020, and the associated resolution for the issuance of 6 bonds to Sagicor Life Incorporated. You may recall, sir, that in 2016, during the term of the previous administration, the then government would have approved the provision of financial assistance to Sagicor Life to allow the pension plans of employees of British American Insurance Company to be preserved and paid. You may recall, sir, that the decision came about when the British American Insurance Company, Barbados Limited, became insolvent, went belly up. And the former government administration agreed to use some of taxpayers' money to bail out this company, if we may say so. With British American's failure, Sagicor Life, Inc. stepped in as administrator of British American's pension plan, that aspect of the portfolio. Other entities assumed other parts of the portfolio. There was much public discussion on the matter, sir. Some dissatisfaction was rampant, and there were others who had other opinions. I could chronicle the details, sir, but I believe that for some people, the scab is still on the wounds of where some people were hurt. As you know, sir, the way that government works is that commitments made by a previous administration are usually binding on a subsequent administration, whether the subsequent administration agrees or not. A government obligation is a government obligation, sir, no matter which administration committed to it and who must pay the bill. And we are indeed paying, sir, and managing the best way we can the hard situation into which we were put with this situation. Under the British American Insurance Company Barbados Limited Preservation of Investments Act 2016, to which I referred, Section 6 of the Act speaks to the issuance of 6 promissory notes as the support that would be provided by government to Sagicor Life. Subsequently, however, the judicial managers of British American Insurance Company Barbados Limited, these judicial managers were appointed by order of the Supreme Court of Barbados in September of 2010. The judicial managers advised that Sagicor was no longer interested in receiving promissory notes and had requested to be issued bonds instead. In an effort to resolve these matters, government has agreed, and it is therefore proposing in this bill that the bonds to Sagicor Life, Inc. for the amount of $8.115 million in respect of Sagicor's assumption of pension liabilities of British American Insurance Company Barbados Limited in judicial management for 68 employees, that they be issued in 6 tranches at an interest of about 7.5%. Mr. President, the 6 bonds would mature, meaning their principal will come due for payment, at various times over 5 to 30 years. This is contained in the schedule to the bill that is before us, and that schedule outlines the terms and conditions. The schedule speaks to maturity dates from the date of allotment of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, and 30 years. The face value for the 6 bonds, or 3 bonds, have a face value of $0.625 million. 2 bonds have a face value of $3 million. And 1 bond has a face value of $0.24 million. The funds to Sagicor Life to honor these bonds would come from government's consolidated fund, the central government bank account. Mr. President, I wish to reiterate that the bill before this Honorable House is not seeking to make any fundamental change to the deal that was originally made. This bill simply seeks to convert the financial instruments from promissory note to bond, and to facilitate this conversion from the issuance of promissory note to bonds, an amendment to the Principal Act is required. The specific amendment, Mr. President, is that of deleting Section 6 and replacing it in the current Act, and replacing it, substituting with the text that speaks to the conversion I mentioned earlier. With these few words, sir, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
I recognize Senator Franklin.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is going to be the shortest speech I've ever made in the Senate, because I am in support of government's behavior in this transaction here. The last administration, they made promises, and as Senator McConaughey rightly said, they are binding on the government, whichever administration makes them. And I'm not even opposed to the last administration making them, because these were people's pension plans. You are going to put people in a state of poverty if you didn't help them. And I think they deserve help. However, sir, I said all of that to say that when the last administration made errors, government should fix them, because those errors are not binding on the new administration. And the case in point that I want to talk about, sir, are pensions for persons who were declared medically unfit, who worked in the public service. The last administration, in an attempt to save money, they wanted to balance the budget on the backs of the poor people, something that you are continuing. And they decided, or got some advice, that the invalidity benefit paid to workers is the same thing as the national insurance pension. Sir, it is not. And every day, but I say every week, I don't get one every day, but every week, I get calls from persons who used to be public servants, who were declared medically unfit for work, and they are entitled to receive their pensions. Because if you're declared medically unfit in the public service, you get a pension after 10 years service, but that pension is payable from any time, as long as you got 10 years, so you don't have to wait until you're 60. So the pension is you start paying your pension immediately if you're declared medically unfit. I want to get that absolutely clear. You get your pension if you're declared medically unfit if you have 10 years service. If you have 10 years service and less than 20, the government credit you with the other time and give you a pension based on 20 years service. And you go home with a pension that will keep you until such time. What will happen there, sir, is like you have a situation where a person contract a mortgage, never planning to get ill, so he is grateful that he's getting the pension from the government, and because now after a year on sick leave, you should go to the national insurance and get your invalidity benefits, because permanent government employees do not get national insurance sickness benefits. The reason for that is that when the national insurance scheme came into being, government officers already had a better system where they were entitled to an extension of sick leave on full pay for a year. After that year, government should, by that time, put measures in place so you can be declared medically unfit, and then you would go on to get your pension from the Treasury, and then you can go to national insurance, because national insurance pays you a sickness benefit for people who are not in the government service and appointed for 312 days. 312 days for national insurance is a year, because they don't pay for Sundays. And you would get the invalidity benefit after those 312 days pass. The last administration took advice, whoever they took it from, and to this day, this bad advice is continuing, where you are now, where they're saying to you, if you are in receipt of your government pension because you've been home medically unfit, your invalidity benefit from national insurance is now called a pension, and your national insurance pension is deducted from the money you get from the Treasury. So what, in effect, you only get, if, let's say the Treasury gives you $10 and your national insurance pension is $6, Treasury gives you $4. No, sir, that is not the case. That's not what the law requires. In 1975, the government amended the pension acts, and I said pension acts, for almost all categories of public employees, appointed public servants, teachers. They didn't amend it for judges or themselves, because parliamentarians, judges, and governor general, they still get their two pensions. But this pension, this deduction, this reduction in your pension is done at national insurance pensionable age. The national insurance pensionable age, if you look into the national insurance regulations, is 67. It was increased in 2005 to 66 and a half, to 66 and a half, and then 67, and it goes all the way up. For every 4 years, it went up until you reach 67 on the 1st of January 2018. So it is now 67 according to the national insurance regulations, and that is when your pension from the Treasury should be reduced by the amount from national insurance. But let me go back to the fellow with the mortgage. You didn't plan to get sick, so you had your mortgage in place. Now you are paying the mortgage with the check you get from the Treasury, and national insurance gives you enough money to pay the light bill and buy some food. But this nonsense that happened in 2010, where the government took this silly advice and thinks that the invalidity benefit is your pension, and they start reducing your pension immediately, so you can't pay your mortgage anymore, you know. So we have a lot of retired public servants who were retired medically unfit, are now trying their best to hold on to their homes because of a misinterpretation of the pension requirements. But it can't get any clearer than if you look in the general orders. The general orders 8.4, says that the pension that you get from the government is reduced by the pension you get that you qualify for when you reach pensionable age under the national insurance scheme. Pensionable age does not mean 40 or 45 when you start getting your invalidity benefits. It means 67. So the last administration started it, and in order to continue to save money, this administration has continued, and they are doing it all like now. These people are entitled to receive their invalidity benefits intact, and they are entitled to receive the pension they get when they're declared medically unfit up until the time they reach 67. But most mortgages are done to coincide with your retirement age. So it would not have been a burden on these people, because we call it national insurance. It's insurance for a purpose. It is insurance, and it was insuring you when you reach the point where you cannot work, you don't pay insurance, and then when the time comes, insurance write you off. No, the government must continue to pay these people their pensions from the Treasury until they reach retirement age. Ask the senior people in the public service, or the general, everybody else, to read the general orders. There was a school of thought some years ago that the general orders were not binding in law. If there weren't, there are now, because the Public Service Act 2007, which came into force on the 31st of December 2007, made the general orders a schedule, basically, to the Public Service Act. So right now, you are reading the general orders. They become part of the public service regulations now. And it says at 8.4, General Order 8.4, that this money is reduced at national insurance pensionable age, not when you receive any invalidity benefit. So I am beseeching the government, if they can see the wisdom or the decency in moving to give these people, these 68 people, well, they're not 68, no, I understand some of them have passed waiting for their pensions, you know, unfortunately. If the government sees the wisdom and the decency in paying pensions to these people who the government had no commitment to, other than a minister decided they can help out somebody under the last administration and put this government in this situation where they are forced to do it. These people that I'm complaining about now were former government workers who give of their time, their energy, and everything for the service of the government. And this government and the last are erroneously taking away their pensions. If you can see it, but it's good for people who were in the private sector. Government has a duty to take care of its citizens, but it also has a duty, another duty, to take care of its former workers. And that's all I'm asking. I'm not in opposition to this measure. I think it's decent. But at the same time, you can't be decent on one hand and being decent on the other with your own former employees. I'm just beseeching the government to read the regulations. And it was at pains to point out which. Sir, no. The reason being that these people can't buy lunch. They can't afford a lawyer, sir. And that is the reason. I have actually spoken to a lawyer who is willing to take the matter to court and get his fees after. But I don't want to go to court when all that is required is for government to read the regulations and see that they've made an error, you know. Not that they have made an error, that they are continuing an error made by the last administration. All they have to do is to fix this problem. It is hurting a lot of people. Yesterday I got a call from a lady. Every week, sir, I get people, I have a whole list of people who are suffering as a result. And true enough, all it is, you know, the body won't plan to get sick. And if you get sick where you cannot work, and in some instances, some of the illnesses that these people endure is a result of the conditions that they were housed in. Some of them get government offices were not maintained in the last 10, 12 years. They're now trying to fix a lot of them. As a matter of fact, we are here because we have a problem with our housing. And a lot of that was widespread. And some of these people gone home. Case in point, that building at Warren that caused so much controversy. I don't know why the place is, it should be evacuated, cleaned properly, and then allow people to go back. Because I've seen a situation also where they call it commerce now. Commerce moves into a situation. It is called commerce now. It used to be commerce. I don't know what it is now. They're moved from the first floor. They move into the first floor, the building they call the BART building, or whatever they call it, one office complex, into an environment that was making people sick. All they did was move out the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. because the people in there couldn't go to work. There were some people in there, they had to bring the work outside and get to them because they could not go in that building. They did nothing with that space other than change furniture and put people inside there. So this is some of the conditions that public officers have to endure, and when they were made sick, they are left holding the bag. They've got to pay their medical bills. And then the money that was supposed to pay medical bills, the last administration took it away, and this administration has not found it fit to honor the law, because it is the law that require you to pay these people their pensions. It is unconscionable, sir. I don't feel that we should have to go to court, not when we have so many bright minds in government who can read for themselves. Read it. Don't, if you don't know where to read, I am willing without fee to show you where the reading is. You know, I won't charge. But it is unfair to these workers, or former government workers, to have to endure this poverty. And no government here is being decent enough and generous enough to fix British American. But British American had some bad press, and it's putting shame to the people, and you don't want the bad press, and I was going to say, you fix that. But you still have people to this day who are continuing to suffer because of an error made in 2010 by a Minister of Finance who couldn't add. Those few words, sir. I'm much obliged to you.
Okay, so recognize Senator Greenwich.
Mr. President, this is almost like filling the gap, because I had expected to see a long list of names, and my speech, well, Senator Franklin did surprise me because he said this was going to be the shortest speech he has ever made, and he still did reasonably well in terms of his presentation.
Meeting the requirements of brevity.
Now, Mr. Yeah, in reference to brevity. On the actual. Mr. President, I find it impossible to speak on this particular matter without some reference to the CLECO fiasco as well. Barbadians were exposed to, in fact, let's put it the other way. They actually reposed their confidence in two companies that later, you could say, crashed. And Mr. President, these two companies used the people's money to make investments of their own. A lot of small people, as remember Dennis Kelman always used to speak of the small man, a lot of small people lost their money when those two companies crashed. Particularly, sir, the older folk. And I felt, sir, for those older persons who had nothing left when those companies ran into difficulties. Because these persons had been told, Mr. President, that they should invest and they should save for the retirement. And the persons did exactly that. They followed their agents to the script and invested, sir, for a rainy day. Because, Mr. President, they expected that the money would have been there for them to use in the twilight of their years. And then they found themselves in the same position as irresponsible persons who did not save at all. They had nothing. They got nothing. And as Senator McConney says, this is an excellent example of the continuity of government. I do not think, Mr. President, that you can find a better example anywhere than this particular one, where the continuity of government and government policy is concerned. The last administration gave an undertaking to pay off the CLECO policyholders and to deal with those from British American. And they left office, yes, Mr. President, without honoring that undertaking. They did not do it. I say this morning, sir, that this Barbados Labour Party government has to be commended for the business-like manner in which they have handled this particular matter. The government of Barbados, Mr. President, virtually exposed itself to liability on behalf of its citizens. Indeed, sir, this government responded to the needs and the concerns of its citizens in a very, very positive manner. And it came to their rescue. So this government in particular, Mr. President, has demonstrated that it will listen to the cries of the people, not only on this occasion, I'm sure, but on future occasions. Every single policyholder has expressed gratitude and has appreciated what this government has done on their behalf. It is as if they are saying, CLECO and British American took it away and you gave us back. CLECO and British American, sir, were not government concerns. They are not, sir. They're private businesses. They were not even Barbadian companies, sir. Government, Mr. President, had no legal obligation whatsoever to bail out either company. No legal obligation at all. And that point must be emphasized. Must be emphasized. Government never shared in CLECO or British American's profits. And government, whether it was the former one or this one, could easily have said to those two companies, we have nothing to do with you. You invested in a profit-making venture which failed, and that is your business. That could have been the attitude of government, and they would be on safe ground, legally, perhaps not morally, but they might very well be on safe ground. In some parts of the world, in fact, Mr. President, I go as far as to say in some parts of the region, those policyholders would not have got a cent from their government. Mr. President, you know what has always puzzled me? When the CLECO fiasco and the British American fiasco came to the fore, what always puzzled me was what level of reinsurance, if any at all, was undertaken by these companies on behalf of those policy holders. I am saying, sir, that CLECO and British American should have been properly reinsured against loss with respect to these policies. Should have been properly reinsured. They should have had an insurer properly insure them against exactly what happened to the property, to the policy holders. I don't know what level they had, if any.
But there were supposed to be two agencies, Financial Services
I can get on to that, yeah.
and the Supervisory before them. They don't work.
I think, Mr. President, that this government has been asked to do too much, a little bit too much, sir. $8 million is a lot of money to be taken from the consolidated fund. It's a lot of money. And I'm thinking, sir, of a government doing this. A government, sir, that is already looking after the elderly, assisting them with pensions. A government that is helping people with disabilities, helping people who are on welfare. And now we have to come and throw this amount of money behind the policyholders as well for something that was not really your concern. Government got into this because there were Barbadians who were involved. Mr. President, sir, in future, I believe that insurance companies such as CLECO and such as British American must be held to certain standards, and I mean high standards, especially in relation to the investments that they make with the people's money. The decisions that they make on behalf of the people, so they say, those decisions should be financially prudent and financially sound decisions. I know of what I speak. If you know of certain things that certain people invested in, you would know that that was very ill-advised. I'll say no more about that, sir. I'm saying that they should weigh the pros and the cons, Mr. President, of the investments that they make with the people's money. Mr. President, there should never have been situations, sir, where those companies allow the liabilities to constantly outgallop their assets. Should never have happened without the knowledge of the policyholders. Mr. President, you can do what you like with your own money, but you should not be allowed to do it with the people's money. Their investments, sir, should not have been secret investments.
Supervisors.
It's the policyholders' money. And I'm saying so that someone at some stage, somewhere, should know that those companies have sufficient funds of their own to cover their liabilities when such fiascos occur. This country of ours, sir, must do its best to ensure that we do not have another CLECO and another British American fiasco.
Not doing anything.
I'm going to admit, so I realize that the oversight has improved. And I also admit that in recent times we have seen a bit more energy and a bit more leadership coming from the Financial Services Commission as it tries to bring some semblance of control, some semblance of leadership and regulation to these companies. The Financial Service Commission, sir, it is trying to ensure that companies
Give serious cause for concern.
Yeah. Companies become good caretakers of the people's money. And I can see you are saying, sir, that these companies, sir, give all Barbadians serious cause for concern. And there has to be such intervention, sir. Because, believe it or not, without such intervention, Mr. President, there will be, I believe there already has been, a reluctance on the part of Barbadians to invest in such companies again. And it would be a pity if this is what happens and Barbadians no longer have confidence to invest in these companies. Because we still have a generous section of our population that love to invest. Remember, sir, I was surprised when the trade confirmers matter hit the ceiling, sir, to know the number of lawyers and the number of policemen and so on who are actually the ones that got burnt. And people are looking for ways to invest. And look what has happened. Look what has happened. Nowadays, sir, the banks are not giving interest, on your money. On top of that, sir, you are paying the banks a few to keep the few cents that you have. Paying the banks just to keep a couple dollars for you. When you ask, what is this? Oh, that is something they took out to service your account. And what about this one? Oh, that is what we took out because you withdrew over the counter rather than use the ATM. And this is what is happening. This is what's happening. Banks are virtually hinting to you that you should invest your money somewhere else other than with them. Because that's the only message they could be sending, Mr. President. They're driving you literally to the credit unions, driving you away from the banks. People want to invest and make a dollar. So, Mr. President, I do believe that Barbadians still want to invest, but they are just a little bit scared of what happened to CLECO, and British American. Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you. I recognize Senator Boyce.
Mr. President, I wasn't going to speak, but I'm going to take debate in the fact that I've already declared to this honorable House that this is a matter which I have been intimately involved in a different capacity, and I want to make that absolutely clear. Without going into details, I do, however, believe that I can refer to certain public documents, Mr. President, so as to clarify a few of the statements made in this honorable House this morning. At the end of the day, though, I believe, Mr. President, the recognition is that what is being done is something that's being done for the benefit of persons. I think it's an important distinction to make when the terms CLECO and British American are bandied about. Because what the government is doing is actually providing support for pension holders, employee pension holders who are employed by British American. That's the first thing. That support was an option which the government could have exercised not to do. However, it is a support which the government has taken the decision to provide, and while mindful of Senator Franklin's comments about if you do for some, do for all, at the end of the day, the government has to be commended for assisting these persons. The government is not assisting the company. The government is assisting these employees who, we hear a variety of reasons for the way they have found themselves in the position, and they are now being provided with safeguards. And that safeguard, sir, it should be mentioned, could not happen without the assistance of Sagicor, because you need someone to provide the vehicle to provide the benefit. Or else the government could have simply distributed the cash, if it wished, to support these employees, but then they would find themselves in a position where they wouldn't be able to get the long-term benefits of having a pension. So you need an administrator to do the process. The entity which was willing is Sagicor, and this is now moving forward after the government has made the determination to assist and to provide the assistance in the format that Sagicor has now requested for whatever reason the financial minds might determine prudent. That's the first thing, Mr. President. So let's be very mindful as to what the government is doing and who the government is helping. At the end of the day, these employees are citizens, and there, for the grace of God, goes any of us with regard to investments that we may have. So we should be mindful of this, Mr. President. Secondly, sir, I think it would be remiss of me not to mention that in referencing the issue with British American and where the British American solution is, that the conflating of the two judicial managements, and maybe that's where we should start, Mr. President. I've heard the term bandied about of a bailout. I've heard the term bandied about of, I can't recall exactly, but long story short, the process which was utilized for both of these companies, Mr. President, is the process that the Insurance Act says you should adopt in these type of scenarios. You appoint a judicial manager where the insurance company finds itself in a certain deficit, and the judicial manager does what it's supposed to do in regard to redeeming the company or finding a solution. Now, Mr. President, the judicial manager has to act in the best interest of policyholders, not in the best interest of investors, policyholders, not in the best interest of the company itself, certainly not in the best interest of the government or the man on the street. The judicial manager is responsible for the policyholders of the company. And not only is the judicial manager responsible to the policyholders, Mr. President, but the judicial manager is supervised by the court in this process. So the judicial manager doesn't have the opportunity to do things that were untoward or without some type of regulation. The court keeps an eye on what the judicial manager is doing. And not only that, Mr. President, through the entire process, the FFC is involved with regard to the judicial manager's steps that are taken. So you have a scenario where there is a mechanism provided in the Insurance Act, and this mechanism was utilized for the companies in question. And if we look at the example of British American, Mr. President, British American went into judicial management in 2010, September, and we are now, sir, in 2020. However, Mr. President, the judicial manager of British American filed its report since March 2016 with the solution, sir. Since March 2016, the judicial manager set forth the solution for the British American entity. And the court has been extremely supportive in getting the matter dealt with. However, before we get to what has happened since 2016, let's look at what has happened between 2010 to 2016, sir. During that period, sir, the policyholders who had health claims and property claims were satisfied, sir. During that period, sir, policyholders who had what you call de minimis or small claims, they were satisfied, sir. The judicial manager also was able, sir, to sell off certain aspects of the policies to other insurance companies to allow those persons to be covered. At the end of the day, sir, we are talking of 13,000 Barbadians, not British American. This is 13,000 lives that we are speaking about. The judicial manager, sir, in 2016 went to the court and indicated this is the solution for these persons. Sagicor again was the entity who was providing the assistance, and the government of Barbados, and this is how the assistance would work. The government of Barbados, and sir, just for your reference, I'm referring to a public document that has been filed in the court, it's judicial manager's report, which is available as a public document filed on the 14th of March 2016, sir. So, sir, this is the solution. The company owned certain buildings. Those buildings would be transferred to the government and the people of Barbados. The company had certain assets. Those assets would be transferred to Sagicor to secure the insurance policies that are going across to Sagicor. At the end of the day, there was a deficit. That deficit was, of course, what led to the whole concept of judicial management in the first place. But you're talking about the simple fact is the statutory fund for the company was not at the level it was supposed to be to support the policies. So what happens, Mr. President, is that the policyholders go across to Sagicor. The government receives the buildings that the company owns. Sagicor receives the assets that the company held with regard to the deficit, and the government then provided the security to secure the deficit of the statutory fund in terms of what was going across and what was necessary to make up that deficit. So right now it's sounding very technical, Mr. President, but it's as simple as this, sir. If the asset, let's assume, sir, that the policyholders, let's say you're a policyholder, Mr. President, and your policy was valued at $100, sir. Because there was a deficit in the statutory fund, the asset to support that $100, sir, only covered $50. Are you with me, sir? Mm-hmm. It's almost like I'm in court, sir. So the asset to support the policy is only $50. So there was a shortfall, Mr. President, of another $50. When the assets from the company were transferred to Sagicor, that's that $50, so you have that $50 deficit. When the assets from the company were transferred to the government, let's put that hypothetically, sir, at another $20. So you have a $30 deficit, sir. That deficit was then abridged by the government in providing support not through cash, but through government securities which were of a certain nature to allow Sagicor to say, I have 100% coverage of this policy, I am going forward with it. And as a result of this, Mr. President, and as a result of this deal, and as a result of this transaction, Mr. President, you now have a situation where 13,000 Barbadians, Mr. President, are now in a position where their policies, which were involved with a company which went into insolvency, which had issues, are now safe because of the intervention of the government presently, the government formerly, and the white knight investor of Sagicor. And sir, this was put before the court since 2016. And the court, sir, has worked extremely hard with the judicial manager and the FFC to get the solution. What happened, sir, post-2016 to date is in light of certain economic worldwide situations, there was a series of maneuvers, and I can not go into details, but long story short, sir, there was an issue with regard to the security and the nature of which was necessary to make the deal finalized. But it has happened, sir. The policies have been transferred. Sagicor is maintaining the policyholders. The policyholders, maybe the same ones that thanked Senator Greenidge, now have their insurance covered, sir. These 13,000 persons. The government will be getting the building, sir. One of the buildings perhaps we could utilize for the parliament in the near future, sir. No, this is not one of the British Americans. This is one of the British Americans are the one at Collymore Rock and in Tong and other places, sir. So at the end of the day, I just wanted to rise to bring a little extremely independent clarity to the discussion and to ensure that while we debate and while we recognize that there were different mechanics and motivations, at the end of the day, sir, 13,000 Barbadian policyholders have been provided for. We have to thank the government, we have to thank the court, and we have to thank Sagicor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Dr. Lynette Holder. Happy to recognize you, please.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. And good afternoon to the chamber. I feel it important to give a contribution this afternoon. And if you permit me, Mr. President, I'm going to change my modus operandi and speak to a matter that is very dear to my heart and maybe unfamiliar to my colleagues. And that is to help us to focus this afternoon on the role of government, and the role of government, might I add, from a very biblical perspective. I'm conscious of the arrangements, the new arrangement this afternoon. My good friend, Senator Caswell, is a bit far from me. And I tend to look to him sometimes, you know, for that kind of objective perspective. He's a bit far, but nonetheless, we'll proceed. Yes. Mr. President, as I read the amendment that is before us today, I looked at the resolution, and the thought came to mind that what we are debating this afternoon should help us to appreciate what really is the role of government. What really is our responsibility as government? We are all here, we are senators, we have committed to being involved in public life, we have committed to serving our citizens at one level or another, one form or another. And I think that as we go forward, it is important that we hold to certain key principles, never to deviate from these principles, Mr. President, because these principles are inherent in our very call, our very responsibility that we bring to bear in this thing called public life. Now, I know that there are many who tell us it is now 2020, let us not go back. Let us not cast our minds back to pre-2018 and all that would have transpired there. Many of us, as we listen to debates in the other place and we see the comments and so on being made by citizens, they'll always say, well let us go forward now. It's important that we bear in mind that we elected you and your responsibility now is to take us forward. I agree with that. I agree that heading into 2 years, it is incumbent on us to ensure that we stay focused on the future, on transforming our economy and fulfilling the mandate for which the people would have given us. But it is important every now and again, Mr. President, to reflect on the past. Because if you do not reflect on the past, you are prone to make some of the same mistakes in the future. And this particular matter here reminds us of just that. And the responsibility now of this government to ensure that we embrace this concept of what really is the role of government. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to be very short this afternoon, Mr. President. No need to look at your watch. I'll be very short. The facts are that we had this issue back in 2010, and we were told, oh, these insurance companies are sound, they are well managed, they are well regulated, all that, no need for fear, no need for panic in the society. And we realize, as time, they tell us, is often a very good teacher, we realize that that was not the case. And the facts were that the company was not well managed, the company was not well regulated, and as a matter of fact, I think the data is there to suggest that it indeed did breach certain regulations relative to how insurance companies ought to operate in this country. But nonetheless, our citizenry believed, as they are prone to, what the leader of the country says, and you didn't have a run on the insurance companies to cash in policies and so on. And what we have then after is now a new administration coming to the fore and is tasked with the responsibility of cleaning up some of this mess. And this, you may tell me, yes, but this is the role of government. Government is a continuum. So we have now to clean up some of this mess. And so what we are debating today is our effort to right a wrong for some 68 employees to ensure that they're able to receive their pensions, that the future that they planned, that the goals that they would have set for themselves, that they can still realize, that there's still some potential and opportunity that they can realize these because their pensions are secure. So here we are today righting this wrong. And what it says to me is that the role of government cannot be just about guaranteeing the rights and freedoms and liberties of our people. Yes, we recite this, we refer to our Constitution and we see these points. But I want to add that it is inherent in this concept that it has to be about protecting the poor, protecting the vulnerable, protecting those that cannot protect themselves. It must be, Mr. President, about protecting those that are vulnerable within the society that cannot protect themselves. That has to be inherent in our understanding of what our role is as a government, any government for that matter. And the day that we do not appreciate that, the day that we do not adhere, we're not compliant to this inherent concept and principle, Mr. President, I suggest is the day that any government will feel the brunt. They will feel the brunt of the consequences of breaching that particular rule. It must be inherent in all that we do. And so as I read the resolution, as I looked at what it is that we're really attempting to do here this afternoon, we are, yes, righting this wrong. But let us not lose the opportunity to appreciate what this really means it goes beyond just protecting those 68 employees. But it also means that we have an appreciation, I would think, this afternoon for this responsibility, this divine responsibility, even if you will, in protecting the vulnerable within our society. And so this takes me to, Mr. President, this conversation that I would wish to commence in this chamber. And matter of fact, today is a good day for it because it's a new location. And it's always good to start new things. You see, Mr. President, I am a strong believer in natural law. I believe that there are laws inherent in our very creation. Yes, there's a very minority of people who understand and maybe believe that, but they are inherent in our very design. For example, this is not one of the natural laws, but by way of illustration, sir, if you go and you stand on the top of this building, there is a law of gravity that says that if you step off, Mr. President, you will fall to the ground. And so, as I say to people in my circle, you can pray and fast, you can speak in an unknown language if you wish, you can do all of these things. The fact is, if you breach the law of gravity, there's every possibility that if the building is tall enough, you will die. That is a law. So there's nothing you can do to not comply with that law. It is a law. And so, understanding that they are natural laws brings me to my point about, and supports my point, about government's role and government's responsibility in protecting the vulnerable in our society. You see, these laws go back to ancient Greece. And some of us may know of one who was revered as a god by many, known as Hermes Trismegistus. And Hermes Trismegistus was a proponent of natural law, and there are 7 of these laws that bear his name, the Hermetic principles they refer to. And I subscribe to these. I'll tell you the truth, I subscribe to these laws. And one of them, Mr. President, is a law of cause and effect. That says that for every cause, there is an effect.
Cause and effect.
And every effect is as a result of a cause. And if it is that we live by these principles, I suggest to us that we would be able to produce a better population, a better citizenry, and have and enjoy a better life. Case in point, Mr. President, take the law of cause and effect. If we understood how powerful this law was, every time we are about to do harm to an individual, for example, and you got a little stick by a bee or something, as you're about to do that, you would stop automatically because you would realize this damage that I'm about to do to an individual has a consequence. And so I'm getting a little stick each time I do it, that tells me what I'm about to do is wrong. There is an effect for that particular cause, and so we stop. But the reality is that it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. If it did, life would be a little easier, but it doesn't work like that. So it isn't a case where when you do harm to others, that automatically and immediately, I should say, you reap the consequences of that harm. Sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes, Mr. President, it goes across generations. But the point is that the law of cause and effect, in my view, is producing a lot of the damage and the harm and the decay and the decline that we are seeing in aggregate in our society today. And so I believe that our governments, our peoples, have a responsibility to try to change this in the aggregate so that we can produce a better society. So if those who were given the task of leadership back in 2010 paid attention to what they were doing relative to their governance. If it was not a case of just family and friends and protecting the few in their circles, if they, Mr. President, understood this law of cause and effect, then they would not have done some of the things that they did back then. And so what we are seeing in the aggregate is decades after and years after a society reaping the effects of those behaviors. This is what it is. So this is why I began by saying that I want to take the conversation to another level, to cause us to understand that things do not just happen. Things do not just happen. There's no such thing of coincidence or snap a finger and things just happen. All of our behaviors as people, as institutions, as governments, lend to and produce particular outcomes in the society. This is very important, Mr. President, for us to understand. And so this administration now has a responsibility, I believe, to yes, correct some of that wrong, but also to make sure that the seeds we sow today and the things we do today are of such a positive nature and are appropriate to protecting those vulnerable groups and those who are most deserving of what we do, so that in the future we're able to determine the outcome for those who will follow after us. I'm very, very concerned about this because I see people saying things and doing things. People must be conscious that the policies that they introduce now and the legislation that they introduce now will have an effect and will have an impact on the future. And so Hermes gave us the Hermetic principles. I would encourage my colleagues in the chamber, Google and study them if you wish. It is never too late. It is never too late to do the right thing. So some of you may say, okay, yes, these principles look that like I would want to align my behaviors to them. I commend them to you. I commend them to you. But they are based on inherent, and this is the point, they are based on inherent laws. And by inherent laws, I'm suggesting that there's nothing any of us in here this afternoon can do to change them. They are inherent in our very creation, Mr. President. And so this takes me to, I think, my second point. I have a few. Yes, I want to begin by that and lay that as the foundation, first of all, because as a government now, we are coming to the assistance as we should, and I support, therefore, as I said before, the resolution and amendments before us, because we have to assist those 68 employees who were disadvantaged, right? No responsibility necessarily of theirs. So we have to come to their assistance. But let us go further. Let us go further in ensuring that as we go forward, we treat to those who are vulnerable across other spheres in our society. Let us go further, Mr. President. And I'll call one in particular that I have had the pleasure for nearly 30 years of working with and aligning myself to, and that is all micro firms. And this is within the context of treating to the vulnerable groups within our society. That is all micro firms, Mr. President. We have a responsibility to make sure that we take care of that group. I am not a capitalist, Mr. President. I will never be a capitalist, Mr. President. I believe in social democracy. I believe that the government must play an interventionist role in the society, that the government has to protect those who can least protect themselves. So I'm not a capitalist. I will not support any administration that promotes capitalist ideology. I will not. Because I understand that to whom much is given, much is required. This again is an integral part of the principles I subscribe to. And so, when we have, just like these 68 employees, when we have hundreds of micro firms that do not have the capital outlay, do not have the margins in their costing models to allow them to reap significant profits, etc. When they do not have the resources, Mr. President, to expand rapidly and internationalize their businesses, to go beyond their domestic shores, when they are not able to do that, but when we understand that they are in communities all across our nation, when we understand that the women and youth and the differently able and so on, and those that are considered otherwise vulnerable within the society, have the opportunity now to maybe be enfranchised by monetizing an idea, being able to earn some revenue from a skill that they have, when we recognize that these things will contribute not only to economic growth, but to social development, I'm of the view, Mr. President, that the government has a responsibility to give that group a leg up as much as it can. And so I'm lobbying that our micro firms that are equally vulnerable must be given priority in our development policies. Let me hasten to add, because I'm sure some people are thinking about this, let me hasten to add, especially given the fact that we're going through the estimates debates and the estimates presentations and so on at this time, that a lot is being said, and rightly so, about the recent launch of the trust loan program. Mr. President, I think that was a very creative concept. I think that it was in essence a game changer because of the fact that you, as a micro firm, can, without having collateral, that you can come and access $5,000 to $10,000 primarily based on trust. That's what it is. Primarily based on trust. I think that is a good step, and I applaud that. I am, however, of the view that we cannot stop there. We cannot stop there. We have to go further. Because beyond the trust fund, Mr. President, I'm also realizing that another organization that was established to help with those groups may not be getting the capital that is needed to go forward. And that organization I'm speaking to is Fund Access. Now, I had the pleasure, Mr. President, to sit with Professor Arthur, if you would permit me to call his name, former Prime Minister of this country. I felt like the Apostle Paul sitting at the feet of Gamaliel, sitting in Professor Arthur's company and listening to him espouse his economic theories. And I felt like a student, Mr. President. I was moved, I was stirred. I felt, yes, there is still hope for us to look at our economic development policies. I know Professor Arthur said to us, after closing the development bank back in the 1990s, the fact is you needed to have solutions that would address the fallout and be able to close the gap. And so, in the late 1990s, he would have established Fund Access. The administration then established Enterprise Growth Fund. These organs were introduced to help fill the gap that was left by the Barbados Development Bank. And so it's felt today that an organization like Fund Access is still very much relevant, still very much needed. And beyond that, that the government, which I support, Mr. President, the government has a responsibility to ensure that this organ is capitalized. That is the interventionist responsibility I'm talking about, the interventionist role. You have to make sure this agency is capitalized. You cannot leave it on its own. I heard in the presentations the whole notion of using dividends and so on to capitalize the fund access. I am saying, Mr. President, that is not enough. That will not go far enough in being able to provide the much needed funding for a critical agency like Fund Access that takes up, if you will, takes over the responsibility of those firms now that go from a trust fund and who need beyond the $10,000, who need up to $150,000 or so to be able to take their businesses to the next level. So I am of the view that this organization and others like it
Yesterday.
have to receive that support that is needed from government. And so, yes, we have a responsibility to our 68 employees here being discussed. The $8 million, we understand, is coming from the consolidated fund to be able to address the pension needs. And I'm advocating that since the role of government is to take care of the vulnerable within our society, that we must also be able to find the resources to support a fund access and to be able to properly capitalize a fund access so that those vulnerable micro and small firms can access the seed funding, the seed capital they need to be able to do business and do better business here on island. Because the truth is, a lot of these are not internationalizing their operations. They're not at that level. What are they doing? They're simply providing goods and services for the domestic market and what we call lifestyle businesses. They are those who live out of the business. And it is really about an income for themselves to be able to take care of their families, to take care of their needs here domestically. So these are not the ones that are at that stage for export readiness and so on. So we have also to take care of them. This is, Mr. President, the role of government. And so I support any effort that would see us strengthening further our trust fund and strengthening further our fund access so that those micro and small firms can benefit. And my final point then, if we can get to that, the third point. All right. Since I'm talking about vulnerable groups, remember, Mr. President, I began by saying I wanted to look at the role of government. The MSME sector, again, a vulnerable sector. That means that beyond capitalizing for the sector's growth and so on, we need also to look at the regulatory regime, the regulatory framework for the sector. I heard Senator Greenidge, I believe it is, talking about the banking sector and talking about the onerous fees and the introduction of high costs now in doing business. Mr. President, I have an average week to receive telephone calls and or small firms coming to my office to see me with one challenge or another, sometimes in tears, Mr. President, because of the regulatory environment that they have to do business in. And for us to think that nothing can be done, in my view, would be a breach of our responsibility as a government. I'm not saying that we've said that, but I hope that we're not thinking that. because much has to be done and much must be done. We know of when the policy was introduced that our banks would no longer have a minimum savings rate. That came about through a policy instrument. Equally, a policy instrument can be developed, can be designed to reintroduce a minimum savings rate if we felt that this was necessary. So I'm saying that the policy instruments are there to help to regulate the sector. Now, I am of the view, this is not necessarily a government's position, but this is my position, that we ought to revisit the minimum savings rate that is charged and that is offered by our commercial banks. We have to revisit that. We can no longer allow, Mr. President, our banks to be lords unto themselves and to be introducing fees willy-nilly, as one of my favorite TV actors would say. We cannot allow them to introduce fees unregulated on the backs of Barbadians and on the backs of Barbadian business people, small and micro business persons, without, Mr. President, a sense of control. I'm saying that we need to use the regulatory apparatus that we have to address this matter. It has to happen. I have micro firms coming to me, calling. They get their statements, they see sometimes $30 being introduced as a fee for some nominal activity. You get a bank statement that shows that each month, you're losing, depending on the bank, $10, $20, $30, and depending on the current account you have, it could be as much as $200. No, honestly, Mr. President, this is a bit much. This is definitely a bit much for our micro firms. And what compounds the issue is that though we are encouraging the use of the credit union to take your deposits and, that you can establish savings accounts and so on, the legislation has not been favorable, as we know, to credit unions being able to offer current accounts to their corporate members. Because yes, we allow for corporate membership, Mr. President. We allow for corporate membership. But we do not yet have revisions to our Cooperative Societies Act that would allow those who have the corporate account, the corporate membership, to be able to open a current account that they can do business with. Now, that is a different conversation, Mr. President, that will be had at some other time. I will come back, God willing, to speak to that matter at some other time, because we have to revisit the legislation that administers the credit union sector, if it is that we want to enable our credit unions now to help our micro firms and our businesses to be able to do business with them. But regulatory instruments can be used to address the issue of the out-of-controlled way and manner in which our commercial banks in this country are imposing fees and penalties on clients, especially business clients. I'm saying that we have to revisit this matter. Mr. President, these are vulnerable groups too. These are vulnerable groups too that deserve the protection of government. Government has to intervene and protect these groups. They are suffering. I had one member on the phone just last week to tears. And when you, Mr. President, you would understand. When a man cries, they say that we females, we use the right side of our brains. We can cry a lot easier. We tend to be more emotional. That's the kind of jargon people put out there. But when a male cries, Mr. President, it has to touch your heart. It has to touch your heart. And to have this gentleman who said, he said to me, Senator, I have just one more week of stock. I have now no choice but in a week's time to let my staff go. But I tried frantically to see what were some of the solutions that could be brought to bear to that particular issue. But this is a recurring decimal that I am experiencing every possible week. Every possible week. Because if it is not the inability to access beyond what the trust fund will offer, so you access higher levels of capital, we have a whole set of fees which we know have been introduced that members are telling you in small firms are having a struggle with. But I want to see the balance because I understand why some of them had to be introduced. I understand that. I'm not naive to that reality. I am very much appreciative of the fact that some had to be introduced because of what was inherited back in 2018. I'm very much aware of that. But then we have to make sure we balance it. We have to balance it. We have to balance it by ensuring a greater and a more enabling regulatory environment. We have to balance it by bringing to the fore, for example, our procurement legislation that allows our micro and small firms to be able to access government's goods and services through some sort of procurement regime. We have to balance it through strengthening the technical assistance window offered by government agencies, in particular the BIDC. We have to balance it. So whereas, yes, I understand that some fees are necessary because of the economic, the fiscal environment that we're in, let us try, Mr. President, to balance it so that those that are vulnerable will not fall through the cracks. That is simply my message this afternoon. So whereas we recognize that as a government we had a moral responsibility to the former employees of the British American Insurance Company through the amendments today, we equally have a moral responsibility to those that are helping to hire 2 and 3 persons every quarter, every 6 months in the communities across this country. Because I put it to you that no large business in Barbados is able in one clean sweep to hire 500 employees at any one time. None of them. Can't do it. Can't do it. But if you get 1,000 micro and small firms, Mr. President, that can each hire 1 individual every year because of an enabling business environment, you're able to address your unemployment levels, I think, in a more sustainable manner than if we look for the big firms to be able to come in and gobble up the unemployment that exists. Let us treat this sector as a sector that needs our support, that needs greater support, because I don't want to sit with people thinking that there's not been support. There has been support. For the last nearly 2 years, there has been support for the sector. Where I sit, Mr. President, I'm calling for more. And that's a fact. I am calling for more. I am saying that there must be more, because we are seeing that too many of them are finding it more and more challenging to simply survive. So there must be more. We have to address business facilitation. We have to address the regulatory environment within which our commercial banks operate. We have to address, again, the legislative environment for our credit unions that allow them to be able to assist their corporate members with the current accounts and so on. And not only the current accounts, but the online facilities as well. We have to do more through our procurement legislation that guarantees micro and small firms a percentage of government's pie relative to the goods and services. We have to do more, Mr. President. We have to do more because this is a vulnerable group that if we do not take up a lot of them off the streets, enfranchise them, Mr. President, they then become, as you very well know, based on the research, another social problem down the road. So, Mr. President, as I close this afternoon, I do so as I began, to suggest to us that the role of government must be beyond protecting and ensuring the rights and freedoms and liberties of people, of the citizens and so on, but also must be protecting the poor and vulnerable. I can't emphasize that enough. And I want to make sure that we are doing that even more. You see, the writer of the Epistle to the Romans said this in chapter 13. He says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established." The authorities that exist have been established by God. Why am I closing with this? I'm closing with this, Mr. President, to remind us, do not be fooled, Mr. President, by no 30 love. Don't be fooled by that. Because I know that people are enamored. I walk around, I hear people are enamored, and that has the potential to puff up our chest and cause people to become very arrogant. Do not be fooled by that. All that has done is giving you a greater responsibility to protect the vulnerable in the society. That's all that has done, giving you a greater responsibility. Because understand who sets up and who brings down. Believe it or not, though the science may say it is not the voter casting that X. It is a divine, Mr. President, a divine, you may say power, person, whatever you wish to use. I believe person. But a divine person that is always behind what happens relative to governments in a country. Sometimes we don't like them. Sometimes we don't like who we see. I'm sure many people across the world are anxious about what will happen come November this year in another place. Sometimes you don't like it, but the fact is, you may think that it is what the pollsters say, and you may think it is just what people do when they go into the booth. But I'm putting it to you, Mr. President, that if you believe, and I think we do because we all begin with prayers and devotions and so on, but if you believe in this concept, then accept it is a divine hand that determines the outcome. And so when that divine hand gives you the responsibility to govern and to manage, make sure you protect the vulnerable. Because if you don't, that hand, as quickly as it puts you there, even quicker, it can move you. With those words, I'm obliged.
Senator Rudy Grant, it's now your turn, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't intend to be.
That's what she said.
Right. And I was encouraging Senator Dr. Holder to be, to take some of my time. I really enjoyed the contribution made by Senator Holder. She did reference the fact about the commercial banks and the manner in which the commercial banks function, and the issue with fees. And she made me recall that when I left Barbados to take up the position of CEO of the Grenada Tourism Authority, I took the few dollars that I had, I took with me to Grenada. And at one bank, I left just a couple dollars to keep the account going. And then about a year and a half after, I got a call from the bank telling me that I owed them money. And I said, I owe you money? And they said, yes, your account is overdrawn. I said, but I'm surprised to hear that because there's no overdraft facility on that account. And they said, no, what has been happening is that the monthly charges have been accumulating. The monthly charges are being taken off of the account. And by then, sir, I had, it would have been hundreds of dollars to pay. So I told them, sir, you know, since I'm not using the account, what they could do is to close the account and credit back the money to zero that they would have taken. But I take the point that is made that it is challenging sometimes with the commercial banks. And while we speak to this piece of amendment in this legislation, I am going to make some reference a little later to the commercial banks and the manner in which the commercial banks need, I think, sir, to facilitate business. But it is important that we are here to support this legislation which facilitates the pensions for 68 employees. Of course, we know, sir, that there are times when businesses face challenges. And I wouldn't go through the history as to why we are here today. But I think it is very clearly understood that there are times when government is required to act in the best interests and to safeguard the interests of workers and at times even to safeguard the interests of businesses. Many of us will recall that in 2018, I believe it was, the United States was facing economic challenges. And the then President Obama, I believe would have provided a stimulus of US $787 billion to get that economy going. I also believe that there was a piece of legislation that was passed that provided for another further injection in terms of investment of $250 billion US as well. And I reference that to make the point that here it was one of the largest economy in the world, facing significant challenges and the determination being made to utilize funding to assist with businesses. Of course, you will recall as well that President Obama, I'm in the Senate, so I'm somewhat, yeah, he was a senator too. He was a senator as well. But President Obama would have saved a number of businesses. I believe there would have been auto businesses that he would have saved. And I reflect on those things only to say that that was the focus of President Obama at that time. Our focus here and now is to safeguard the well-being of 68 employees through the provision of pensions. And I have to say to this chamber, sir, that fits in to the philosophy and the mandate of the Barbados Labour Party. I'm sure that honorable senators will be aware both on this side as well as on the other side of the Barbados Labour Party's Covenant of Hope. And the Covenant of Hope makes reference to the fact that the BLP stands for fair treatment and just reward for workers and investors alike. So I'm very happy, sir, to support this legislation. I believe that this piece of legislation is extremely important. I believe, sir, that it properly reflects the commitment of this Barbados Labour Party government to safeguarding workers and facilitating benefits for workers. Of course, sir, in business, we are very aware that there are challenges. And no matter what type of business, there's always some measure of risk involved. And today we speak of the employees in relation to British American, but there are other employees that have been affected. So recently there was the closure of Chaps Restaurants Limited, where 149 employees have, without any warning, 149 employees have been sent home. And that is always very sad. Of course, sir, this is a very challenging time as well, where we have to deal with matters such as COVID-19, and where there's some measure of uncertainty. But it is important that where businesses have the ability at times to assist those that are dislocated, that we do that. And I'm happy, sir, to report that the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association, we have certainly sought to assist those 149 employees. And I have to tell this chamber, sir, that it is very positive that we are seeing our members provide opportunities for those workers that have been dislocated. And I think the message that I want to relate is that the commitment of the government is positive and good, but there must also be a commitment that comes from the private sector as well to assist those workers that are that have been dislocated. Sir, we know that as I said, the economic conditions are changing, the fundamentals of business, that is changing too. There are new modalities. Of course, I know that Senator McConney takes responsibility and in a very serious manner is looking at ensuring that Barbados becomes a smart country. And I think that it is important for us to be able to recognize that we have to embrace the new technologies in business to ensure that there's sustainability, continued growth, and that there's viability with businesses as well. Mr. President, I just wanted to touch very briefly on the issue of foreign exchange, because so far we haven't made any reference to that. But to say that I think it is very important, the liberalization that is taking place within the with respect to foreign exchange earning controls. I reflect again, sir, on Grenada. And when I first came back to Barbados to take up this role as CEO of the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association, and I was undertaking my first overseas travel, I just went to the bank. And I indicated to them that I wanted to purchase foreign currency. Sir, I had completely forgotten that I needed to take my passport, that I needed to take evidence of having a ticket in order to be able to get foreign currency. Sir, the reality was that in Grenada, once the bank was able to verify the source of funds, I could go in and ask for whatever amount in foreign currency that I wanted. And I therefore think that it is a very positive thing to see that government has moved in the direction where Barbadians can now hold foreign exchange accounts, and where government has also been able to increase the amount of foreign exchange available to individuals on a yearly basis. In fact, I believe in the past it would have been 7,500 Barbados dollars that would have been facilitated, and now that amount has been increased to $20,000. I also think, sir, that we have to commend the government for the fact that you can now get more in terms of foreign currency cash to take overseas. In the past, you were only allowed the equivalent of 1,000 Barbados dollars, but now you are allowed, sir, the equivalent of 2,500 Barbados dollars. And I think, sir, that is very positive and that is very good. But we have to ask the question, how is the government able to facilitate the liberalization in foreign exchange? And while the amendment to the legislation speaks to the fee, which I believe is a 2% fee with respect to foreign transactions, and based on all the comments that I've heard in the past, I was told, sir, that we're treating these as, we're treating both pieces of legislation together. Am I correct, or am I not? No, we're not dealing with the foreign exchange. I saw some senators looking at that. Mr. President, I'll bring it back to business. No, I'll bring it back to business, Mr. President. I will bring it back to business and say that, you know, that in the same manner that businesses function and create revenues, that there are many businesses, in order for the development of the country and the importance of facilitating us being able to purchase goods and services, must, sir, generate foreign currency. And that the foreign currency element, sir, is extremely important. And therefore, as I reference the foreign exchange control measures, those foreign exchange control measures, sir, are applicable to businesses as well, because I am aware that government has made some adjustments as well in relation to the access to foreign currency. And the reason, sir, why that can be done is that our foreign exchange reserves are now at a significant level. Our foreign exchange reserves, I'm told, sir, yesterday stood at $1.544 billion. And that is a significant increase from where it was when the Barbados Labour Party came to office in 2018, just around $400 million. And that is very positive. We have seen government taking measures, therefore, to liberalize foreign exchange. We have seen government taking measures, therefore, to facilitate greater economic activity and to facilitate for further investment and for further growth within business, and to provide for greater commercial activity. And therefore, sir, I think that that is something that is commendable, measures that are taken not only to ensure that we safeguard employees, but that we also create the correct climate for business to thrive. Sir, I want to end simply by making this statement, that no matter how successful a business is, and no matter what type of business it is, that a large measure and a large part of the functioning of that business relates, sir, to the employees. And therefore, the employees are fundamental to the success of businesses. And in that regard, I think that it is important and very appropriate for businesses to ensure that the correct climate, the correct facilities, the correct environment exists for our workers, particularly if we are asking the workers to give of their very best. It cannot be fair, it cannot be right, it cannot be acceptable for any workers in Barbados to be asked to carry out their duties in conditions and under circumstances that are not acceptable. And therefore, I want to encourage all entities, whether public or private sector, to pay that attention to their employees, because of course, I know, sir, that there is the emphasis on ensuring that there's a greater level of productivity. I can refer again to the commercial banks. You know, sir, I worked at a commercial bank when I first left the Lodge School. And I remember the different functions that were performed by 3 and 4 different people. In that commercial bank today, those functions performed by 3 and 4 individuals are now being performed by 1 individual. And I'm simply saying, sir, that at the same time that there is a greater emphasis and requirement for there to be productivity and to enhance the efficiency within organizations, that we have to ensure that we create the environment where workers are able to thrive and where we look after workers' well-being as well. So, sir, with those very few words on this occasion, I want to give my support to this legislation and to state that I believe that it is very important to see that government is following through to ensure that the pensions of these 68 employees, that these pensions are protected and that these employees now can be a bit more comfortable as we continue to function in a manner to create a greater benefit and a better life for all of our people. I thank you, sir.
Senator McConney, it's now your turn.
Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to wrap up this debate at this time, and I really wish to express appreciation to my fellow senators for the contributions they have made. Senator Franklin spoke about the need to attend further to issues related to pensions for persons who have retired medically unfit. Senator Greenidge spoke about the pain of investors and the need to hold companies like British American, to hold them to account. Senator Boyce reminded us that what we were here to do was really to help Bajans, and no matter what the mechanics or the machinations, we have to come back to the basics, that this is all about helping people, Barbadians. Senator Holder made a very meaningful contribution speaking about the need to consider the role of government, that indeed this bill was about righting wrongs and protecting the vulnerable, and that government has to have that responsibility to ensure that entities are properly capitalized, including those who are small business, that would be considered as small businesses. And Senator Grant spoke to us about the appropriateness of utilizing funds to assist businesses and people who are dislocated, and that we need to ensure sustainability while considering the conditions of workers to ensure both their well-being and productivity. All of these are relevant, and certainly you can see how they're connected to the circumstance that has brought us to this bill. And Mr. President, in passing this bill today, government will be seeking to honor our commitments and to bring to order legal and financial obligations as it relates to the British American company, Barbados Limited situation. And it is with these few words, sir, that I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
The question is that the bill under discussion be now read a second time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into the committee of the whole Senate for the further consideration of this bill in detail. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and we are now in committee.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passage of the bill under consideration in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now be read a third time.
Question is that the bill under consideration be now read a third time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the British American Insurance Company Barbados Limited Preservation of Investments Amendment Act 2020.
Question is that the bill under consideration do now pass and be so cited. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. And the bill is now passed and will be so cited.
Order number 4, Mr. President, in the name of the Honorable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve, in accordance with Section 6.1 of the British American Insurance Company Barbados Limited Preservation of Investments Act 2016, number 5, the issuance of 6 bonds in Sagicor Life Inc. for an amount of $8.115 million on the terms and conditions set out in the schedule to the resolution.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the resolution as read do now pass.
The question is that the resolution do now pass. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. You think the ayes have it. And so the resolution has been passed.
Okay, we're going to tell you if you're taking a break for lunch now. Or if you're joining for coming back. You go up now, shall I join?
Lunch.
We're going
Go ahead. Lunch is ready. Suspend until 3 o'clock.
Right. 2:45, 3 o'clock.
It wasn't encouraging.
Mr. President, I beg to move that we now suspend for lunch until 3 p.m.
Okay. The question is that we now take the luncheon break and so suspend our sitting until 3 p.m.
There's a reason? Okay, you can say the reason instead. We will come back here for the briefing. You will come back from with them, coronavirus meeting.
Mr. President, what you would have witnessed is some consultation that has been going on based on information that is now coming in as we speak. And we are, in light of the fact that there is another presentation to be made to the members of this honorable House, I wish to revise that motion that we would suspend until 6 p.m. this evening.
So we come back at 6.
So we are suspending now for the luncheon break and to be followed by the presentation on the virus. So the question is that this session be now suspended for the two purposes indicated until 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. And we now stand suspended until 6 p.m.